Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on NFTS Backstories, which is in partnership with the BFI. Today, we're joined by Sophie Worger, and Sophie is a professional AD, and she's recently worked on shows like Ted Lasso and End of the Fucking World. I think we pronounce it that way. Not sure how you do Star when you pronounce it. But we're very happy to be joined by Sophie, and she's given us a bit of her time in between Christmas and New Year that we can grab her in between projects. So hello, Sophie. Welcome to our little video chat.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my first question is, it's a really obvious one, but what is an assistant director and what do they do?
Oh, it feels like a big question. Okay. So the way I describe an assistant director to all of my friends and family that have no clue what I do is I sometimes say it's like having a head teacher on set or teachers. We're there to ensure that everyone is communicating within departments, and I guess to link everyone up so that there's always like a common thread, and I guess we're the common thread. Aside from doing that, which is kind of like an overarching goal, we also look after the actors and make sure that they're okay and that they get there on time, and that they're all kind of put through costume and makeup. And then once we get filming, I always find it quite incredible that you've got about 8 departments that all need to come together at one moment, and everyone's got to have done their job and their bit. It's probably even more than that department wise. And then you have to say action and cut. And in that moment, everything has to be perfect to create this ulterior world. And it's our job to safeguard that. So whether that's sound or sound is a lot of one, we look after making sure everyone's quite quiet. So it's our job to kind of safeguard that moment, make that moment happen, and then let everyone know when that moment stopped and everyone can kind of relax and be themselves again.
Cool. So I mean, when did you decide this was an area or a field that you wanted to explore, and how did you enter that field?
Good question, because it can happen in so many different ways. I did a drama degree, which is completely separate in some ways to what we're doing. Being an AD is very logistical and logical. There are little moments where you can be creative, but generally speaking, it's about having a sense of initiative, forward thinking, and practicality, really, as well as being easy to talk to and speak with. So I left uni thinking all sorts of things, but not thinking about anything that I would probably be in telly at all, because I did a lot of theatre within university. I did an office job. I went rogue for a bit, as you should do after uni, I do believe. And then I went and I quit an office job and just thought, do you know what? I'm going to try and get into television because I feel like I'll meet nice people who might be like-minded and fun. I'd always loved comedy. I did modules in my A levels to do with like sketch comedy and things like that. And I kind of thought, oh, let's get into TV and see what happens. And I ended up I had a friend who worked in factual entertainment, which is a different sort of sector of television. There's a different hierarchy. There's different sort of model in factual entertainment than there is to what we call scripted, which is kind of where I live now. So scripted is any shows that have writers, etc., that are much more formal. So I went into factual entertainment and did like 4 in a bed, which I had a lot of fun, and I actually did meet loads of lovely people that I sort of chimed with. And then there became a moment, and I had 2 interviews in the same building on one day, like half an hour apart from one another. And one was for a junior researcher position on like a crime thing. And one was for the floor runner position on a show called Trying, which was for Sky with Chris Addison and Joe Joyner. Simon Blackwell wrote it. And I had both interviews, and I was kind of, I think I might have got offered both. And I phoned up a friend who worked in film, and he was like, you should be an AD. You're very much an AD. So it was that moment where, do I step up here or do I do something? And Trying was a comedy, and I'd always wanted to get into comedy. It kind of been the dream of mine. And I did that job. And I loved it. And a floor runner is the position you go into where you're supporting the whole of set. So you can have like a base runner, which does more base at the trucks with costume and makeup, or the floor runner is kind of your main runner that supports the team on set. And I luckily got a really good third AD called Marie Devateur, who was a very quite strict French lady, and she taught me everything. And by the end of that job, I was just like, I love this, and I loved everything about it. I loved the fact that you could be in different departments, and then you could, but you were kind of like there to look after people. Yeah, and then the rest is kind of history from there, because from there I just managed to keep getting floor runner roles, and then I stepped up to thirding, and kind of ends up snowballing a bit.
So does the floor runner, would that represent the entry position in the assistant, the AD department, or?
Yeah, I guess so. If you get a floor runner position for a matter of weeks, then you're able to, and you get a good third AD that's able to train you up, or first AD, then you are in a really good position. I do think it's hard because it's competitive, as all jobs are. So after I did that job, I think I went and was a runner driver, which I would never, ever agree with. I fell asleep in my shoes about 3 times on that job. However, I got so many wonderful things from it. I drove in one of the director and the producer, and I got friends with the director, and that was nice. And he ended up taking me onto the job after that, which ended up being Catastrophe, which is a great show. But when you are a runner driver, you kind of drive people in, maybe drive actors home in the day, and then you're on the floor. It's full on, and it happens in comedy, I think, more because the budgets are lower. But it's something I would now, as a first AD, shy away from having. However, entry-level position, it's not a bad one as long as you're looking after yourself and making sure you're like communicating, taking responsibility for your own welfare, really, because it can be quite tiring. So I would say that either something like that, or better still, you're able to get like days on a job, aka in crowd. So part of the AD department is it's got a crowd side of it, and on the bigger jobs you might have 200 crowd in, and to get 200 crowd ready in the morning, you'll need potentially someone in the car park directing everyone where to go, or you might need someone checking everyone in. You've got a lot less responsibility, but you're able to kind of see what it's about, and you're able to kind of prove yourself to that department, which then sometimes enables, word of mouth, someone to say, look, this person's really good, you should get them in on either main team. But I think it depends where you start. Like some people start in at film and high-end TV, and you have big AD teams there, which might be anywhere between 10 and 20 potentially. And then you get a comedy, which is kind of the stuff I love, but then you just get one floor runner, one third, a second, and a first AD. So it's much slimmer, but you learn a lot. It's kind of a baptism of fire, but you can sink or swim in those scenarios. So if you're looking at dipping your toe and not sort of jumping in full, then getting just days in crowd is a good way to understand if you like the kind of things that you have to do as an assistant director.
So if we're talking about days in crowd or floor runner or runner driver, there isn't particularly any specific qualifications you need for that other than passion and commitment and drive, basically.
Yeah, I think it's one of the departments on set that you really don't need. I mean, the great thing about filming is I think you can go in without much and get experience and still get to the top of the game. As an AD, I speak to lots of people who either haven't been to university. You absolutely don't need to go to university. You just need to have a lot of common sense. And I guess as you get higher up, you have to have more of an admin sense, but you can learn all these things. And it's kind of wonderful because you're very reliant on how you speak with people, your kind of attitudes under pressure, and when you're stressed, and when you've got far too many tasks. Multitasking is top of the game of being an AD. So yeah, you don't really need any qualifications. What I would say is just a keenness. One of the things that you find, I will always employ someone if I meet someone or I talk to someone and they sound like they really want to learn and they really are interested in getting better and getting feedback, and not gonna, if I say to them, look, that's not done right, or that's not how we want to do it, you don't have someone going, oh, but I did it because I did this, or there's never enough time for that in TV world. I kind of just want someone to say, okay, and then they take that in. And I remember as a run, I still remember to this day all of the times that I felt a first AD might say, oh yeah, but this is wrong. And I remember just being mainly frustrated with myself, or wanting to say, oh, but I had a reason I did it that way. And you learn very quickly just to get on with it and just say, okay. And then next time you do it differently. That still feels really real to me, but it's such a good lesson when you're working in a really fast-paced environment. And it shows that you can't be proud. There's just no room for pride. You've just got to get on with it, whatever gets the job done. And essentially you are working to that person. So you have to sort of step in line to how they think. And many might think that's quite archaic, and maybe now there's a different way and you can have a team and it can be a lot more flat. And a lot of the teams in ADing are a bit more flat now, hierarchy wise, whereas they used to be so strict, first, second, third, runner maybe wouldn't ever talk to the first. I mean, you get different dynamics. I think still in film, there is this sort of sense, I haven't done much film myself, but that the runners and the firsts wouldn't probably interact a huge amount. And there is a reason that that's there, and you sort of have to test the waters with a team, but being respectful from the outset and understanding that that exists and that is real. And no matter how flat that is, it will always be called upon if you kind of challenge it in some ways. That makes sense.
So in this conversation, we've kind of talked about first AD, second AD, third AD. What are the differences for the people at home with those three roles, apart from the number, obviously?
Yeah. So let's go like from the top, maybe. So the first AD, when you get a script, say you get episode 1 of a script, the first AD will read episode 1 before anyone else has sort of started of their team. And they will go through and they will what's called break down the script. I'm going to be really simple about this, but what they'll do is they will enter in all the script into a program called Movie Magic, and they will order it in accordance of location, page count, so how much dialogue you've got or action you've got on a page, and whether it's day or night, and lots of other things, including what characters are in it and what props are in it, etc. But the main important ones are what locations and how much you're going to shoot in those locations. So once they've done episode 1, if they're only going to be doing episode 1, they'll then schedule it. So instead of just doing it in the story order, they will then change it around so that if you've got let's say you've got a gym, it takes place in a gym. It takes place in a gym, a library, and there's general scenes in the streets. Well, you'd order all of your gym scenes together and all of your library scenes together, and then your street scenes would be ordered in accordance to probably whereabouts they all are. So that's what the first AD does is they take apart the script and they put it into a logical order that means that when we go filming, we're not going to the gym one day, then the library, and then the streets, because then it means your whole unit has to move and you're going to have different characters all the time. You want to make this as cost efficient and easy as possible for yourself. So we'd spend 3 days in the gym, 2 days in the library, and 2 days running around the streets doing our street scenes. So that's what the first AD does before we've even started filming. From this schedule, all other departments will go off and work out what they need to do that on that specific day, and if there's any problems. And then there's a whole chat about what is the best order to do everything in. So the first AD comes in and does that. And then once we start shooting, it's the job of the first AD to make sure that schedule they've created gets done. So that's on set every day. They will say, look, we've got this to achieve this day, say 5 pages in the library with whatever actors, and they will create a call sheet. New word, big word. Call sheet has basically got all this information on. So who's going to be involved actor-wise, if there's any props, what the synopsis for the scenes are, what you're shooting, rough timings of everything. And that's a call sheet. And that is like the mini schedule. And that goes out every single day of your shooting. So the first AD will curate the call sheet along with the second AD who makes the call sheet. And the first AD will say, look, I need these actors on set for 10 o'clock. And the second goes away and sorts it all out. So this is where it leads nicely onto, actually, before I get to the second, the first AD is then in charge of the team on set. So just making sure that third AD that's with them on set, which is weird, first, third together, and floor runner, they're the people on set, that they are all doing their jobs and everyone's happy and looked after. So the second AD does this amazing call sheet where it goes out to every single person that's coming on the production that day. And it has so much information on it. It's a confidential document because it's got everyone's phone numbers on. It's got timings. It's got information about what we're shooting. So sometimes when you're doing a more like a famous show, they might want you to redact or take out what the synopsis is in case someone got hold of it, etc. So the second AD is in charge of doing that and also liaising with costume and makeup and other departments to make sure that we've got all the right times on that. So if, for example, an actor needs to be in there at 10, they need to get an hour and a half of makeup and half an hour of costume. Well, they'll need to be there at 8. And then the second AD will have to then talk to the transport captain, or maybe they would sort taxis themselves and make sure they get in on time. And then they talk to the actor and say, you're being picked up at 7 a.m. to get in at 8 a.m., et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the second does. The second is a role that lots of people on set really never know because they never see them. But what I've learned about being a second AD is if you can stop the bombs going off, and the less that's said from the second AD, the better their job they're doing. It's really quite a busy, full-on role. And often they're contacted quite a lot by cast out of hours. Really the second AD is the first AD's like right-hand person. When you have a strong second AD, you really feel it. And it's really wonderful because you might write something in a rush and the second AD will say, I've read that and it doesn't make sense. So do you want to change it, or et cetera, et cetera. And they kind of catch it. I sort of think that every role should catch the one above them. So it's okay when you're sort of good at what you're doing, it's okay to look at and think about what the role above you's doing, because actually it helps sometimes when things are really chaotic and busy, which they are on nearly every show you do these days. So I feel like I am really going on, but the third AD is on set with the first AD, and the third AD, I think, is one of the best roles there is. It is a very fun role because you're in between all the departments. So you have to really look after them. You have to have a good relationship with them. It's really important. It's very easy to annoy people as an AD, but it is brilliant when you don't and you get on with everyone. And that is the crux of like the emotional side of the AD department, is that it's a very fine line. You know, you're telling people to be quiet or asking them to be quiet, but then you're also, you know, wanting to make sure that you've got like a nice environment on set, especially if you say work in comedy. I think it's really important to stay lighthearted and fun, and you don't want to be really serious because it will just completely sap out the energy of the actors and the director. And as assistant directors, our job is to be there for the director in whatever capacity that sort of ends up being. So the third AD is in charge of making sure all those communication, any changes and stuff that come down, the first AD will say to the third AD, please make sure all departments know, and the third AD will do that. They'll also they're in charge of the background, the extras, which are called supporting artists now, and they will set the background. So the background will come on set, and the third AD will work with the director often and set the background so it looks nice. The first AD sometimes gets involved. Different first ADs work different ways. It also depends on how experienced your third AD is and how well it's going. I often for rehearsal let the third AD do their thing, and then if I feel like it's really not in the right place, I might get involved. And that is always a bit annoying, because a third AD, it's always best that one person sorts out something like the background, because if different people are moving different people, suddenly it becomes very confusing, because it's a very hard job to set background and then get those background to all do everything at the same time for every take afterwards, especially if people aren't listening, or it's too loud, or they don't have enough time. So it's a really, really hard job to get right. But when you have an excellent third AD, it is fantastic. Yeah, and then the other job the third AD does is looks after the runners or runner, and just make sure they're doing their job, because part between the third AD and the runner, it sort of mixes depending on, again, skill level, but transport needs to be looked after, making sure minibuses are there and cars can get away and get there. Tea table needs to be sorted. Lock-offs whenever you're doing a shot, making sure members of the public or other crew members aren't getting in the shot. That'll be what those guys will sort out. I'm sure there's other things, but they're the things that spring to mind right now. So they sort of work together, and then the runner, moving on to the floor runner, supports the third AD in whatever way. Often when you get a new runner, the third AD will kind of say, look, these are the things we need to do this, do this, do that. But what will happen on the day of the runner is the runner will, especially once they get a bit better or get their relationships going with other crew members, is makeup person might say, oh, do you mind going and grabbing me something from the truck? And the first AD might be saying, oh, wouldn't mind a cup of coffee. And then the third AD might be like, the tea table's still not set up. And suddenly the runner, within the space of about 3 minutes, will have had 3 tasks and they won't know what to do. And that's when things like prioritizing and initiative come into play. But especially when you're really new, that's when your third AD is brilliant, because you can say to your third AD, oh, I've just been asked to get the makeup bag, but then the first wants a coffee, and I know we haven't got the tea table ready. Like, what do I do? And then third will be able to say, look, this is the order you do it in. And that's how you learn, by working with a third to learn what the priorities are in that scenario. And delegate, because you can't really delegate as much as a runner, but one of being a first AD, you delegate a lot, partly because you have to sort of stand in the same place and be available at most of the day.
So
breathe now.
Just to surmise, so I've got it in my head. First AD is the first person hired, basically, in the AD team.
Yeah.
They will get the script, they'll break down the script, send it off to all the departments. Departments will give their feedback. Then the second AD will work to put it into daily call sheets, and they're more office-based, so they're not on set. And then the third AD is basically there to support the first AD on set and handle most of the background artists, etc., while the first AD is presumably working with the director and the DP, etc., and sound.
Yes, and they also, the third AD does another thing that's very big in their role, but they sort the radios out for the whole of the set. So everyone wears a radio on set, so that you communicate either channel 1, which is where I live, or other departments like props or security or locations might have another channel that they live on. So the third AD assigns radios to everyone and makes sure that everyone gets fresh batteries, and that is quite a full-on job. So they also do that. I forgot to add that bit in.
Very good.
But
so
yes,
basically, to use an analogy, a film or a TV show, it's basically like the car of an engine. It's got lots of moving parts, and the AD team is the oil, because it's the one that keeps all the moving parts working together so that you actually move forward. Yeah,
that's a better analogy. I often say to new runners, I'm like, you're hosting a party.
Yeah.
So just make sure everyone is happy and got what they need, and everyone's going to have a really good time.
Yeah.
Obviously with a level of seriousness, because you don't want to be having so much fun you're not doing your job. But both analogies. Yours might be a bit better than the party analogy.
So looking at your career, you started off as a floor runner, then moved to third AD, second AD, first AD, and most recently you did Ted Lasso as first AD. Do you find that most ADs are looking to move up that career path, or do you get ADs that are specific in, I'm a professional second AD, that's the area I'm most happy in, or are they? kind of all
It's
trying to move up the ladder?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think it's evolved over the years. You definitely get career seconds. Um, I would say that's a brilliant, if you know you want to do that and that's what you do, it's brilliant for any first AD to have a career second in because they know what they're doing like the back of their hand. Um, I would, it's really hard to say. I would say nowadays it's a little bit more moving up. I think what I didn't realize when I started in the industry, because I didn't know what an AD was when I started. Someone said to me on that first job I did, they said, you'll just get picked by a department. And at the time I was thinking, oh, maybe I want to do art department or maybe another department would be good. But I did just really enjoy being an AD. And I think I didn't realize how much of a career path it is. So it's quite competitive in all of television and film. And I think now I'm being a first, I don't mind sometimes people being like, oh, I'm not sure what I want to be. But there are times sometimes when someone says that you might think, I'm not necessarily going to get them on a long job because I might invest 2 months of my life on a runner who might end up being brilliant by the end, but then goes, I actually don't want to be an AD. So knowing that someone wants to be an AD is really nice for someone like me who's going to be employing someone, like knowing that they've had a couple of days and they know that that's really what they want to do, even if it's for the next couple of years. I know life changes and people move on, but you're expected as an AD to turn up and be as good at AD as possible. And in a freelance industry, you will not get employed if you're not good or you're not seen to be trying. And I think that's what I also kind of love about this industry is that there's no room for really laziness. You can be lazy and maybe you'll get away with it. But I certainly, if I saw that, wouldn't want to employ that person again. It might not even be that they're a bad person or I don't get on with them. But if I see that other team members are taking up the slack for someone else, then, you know, it might not even get addressed sometimes. Sometimes it will just be a sense of, okay, well, that's not the right fit. Because really, it is so hard sometimes. And when you've been doing a job for a really long time, I think it's really, you want to feel like all your team are in it together. I think I've digressed from your point that you asked me.
No, it's very interesting.
What was the question you asked me?
The question was it a professional kind of first AD, second AD, and did people do careers and settle in just one area?
Yeah, and I think that as a floor runner, it's brilliant for learning. You do learn about loads of departments. My friend who is now he's producing the next show I'm on, was my AD. And I mean, he's a young producer and he's fantastic and he's not even 30 yet. And he started out and he didn't go to university. He spent, I think, 3 years being an AD and sort of got up to thirding and then decided to go in-house and has completely, come round and now is producing. But what's so nice about him as a producer is he understands what set is. He understands how it runs. He understands what's needed, not needed, what's frustrating, etc., which is really fantastic. So I think that you can come and be a runner, give it a go. But if you're going to give it a go, like give it a go, try a couple of jobs, see what it's like. If you feel like it takes to you, because I think it sort of picks you a bit, after a couple of days, whether you think, yeah, this is something I can do or I can't do. And it is hard. Being a runner is really hard. And you get put down quite a bit because you're learning. When you're learning in that environment, when people are busy and things are more chaotic or tense, then you learn quite hard lessons, but quite quickly. But if you thrive in that or you step up to that and you can get past that initial sort of newness, then it can be a fantastic job to do and it can be really fun. And you mentioned Ted Lasso. I was so blessed on Ted Lasso because I had the absolutely most amazing team, and the job went on a lot longer than was anticipated. But what made it bearable is that I had these fantastic runners, thirds, seconds that were all, understood what it was like, but they pushed for it. And I would say lots of ADs you speak of, going back to your question, not all of them want to be ADs forever. I think it's quite it can be quite a demanding role on your lifestyle because you're filming a lot of the time. So other roles have prep or wrap, whereas lots of ADing is you turn up on the first day of shooting, you finish on the last day of shooting, which means you're shooting all of your life. So you're doing 8 till 8, 8 till 6 every day in various different locations, not necessarily just one place. And so it isn't always that suitable for lifestyles. I think the reason we've all ended up doing it, and we all kind of still love it, is that you enjoy it so much. And when you're there, there's such a lovely sort of environment with crew often, if you get a good job, especially. And I've just come off Ted, and Ted was fantastic for that. Everyone was brilliant and fun, and it was hard, and we didn't all get, it was like a family. Sometimes you have moments when you have little spats, but it always kind of ended up being a sorted out, it wasn't a big thing like that. So yeah, I think you can do it for a bit. I think you could be a career AD. I think you've got to make it work, but the main thing you do is you turn up and you perform as that role you're being employed as, because that's what you're there for. Even if you wanted to do other things, you might want to be a writer. Well, if you're being employed as a third AD, turn up that day, be a third AD, put your radio down, and then go and do your writing. Is basically the consensus.
So thinking about the NFTS runs 2 courses, the ADFM course, but also the production management course. And I've noticed they work very, very closely together. What is the production management courses, or what is the production manager's relationship to the AD in terms of scheduling and stuff? How does that work on a professional shoot?
Yeah, so you'll either get a production manager or a line producer. It really varies on different sort of budgets of shows. I would say that plays a part, but not as big a part or relationship as my relationship probably with the producer. I would say that once I've done a schedule, I would often, and maybe this is to do with the producers I've been working with, but I would probably send the schedule to the production manager and the producer, and the production manager might be more involved if the budgets are lower, because obviously they're holding the purse strings, and so they might say, look, we can't have this car in 3 different days, we need to do all the scenes in that car on one day. So I think that would vary. I would say, like, I'm trying to think, I'll do 2 opposite shows that I've worked on. So Mandy, which is a BBC 2 show, which is very low budget, like so fun because it's so low budget, but there's no trucks, you just in rooms. And then you've got Ted Lasso, which is much higher budget. So I would say the only time that I'd really get involved with the production manager or line producer is when they're saying, we can help, the schedule can be changed to spend less money. Or they might say, look, we can't do these 2 locations because it's going to cost too much. So I might say, okay, we'll go to a standard day. So we'll do 12 hours instead of a continuous day when you do 8. I'm going to say that right. Yeah. And they might then say, okay, so that's kind of their involvement with me. And provided they've told me, look, we can't afford a drone for 3 days, we could have a drone one day, and then I would chat with the DOP and say, right, what shots do we need to do when we've got the drone, and do we need to move 3 locations just to get the drone done, and does moving 3 locations cost more than getting the actual drone? So it sort of becomes this thing where you sort of have to weigh up all of these things. So that was my involvement probably with the production manager. On Ted Lasso, when we did 3 units towards the end, that's when I would say to the production manager, how do we want to do this? Like, is catering going to have a problem with that? And are we able to facilitate split hours? And will you be able to crew up enough people? Because the production manager is obviously involved in crewing up. So I would say I probably, when things are changing all the time and you're having to double check lots of stuff. I would say towards the end of Ted Lasso, when we were doing a lot and we were just trying to get the show kind of shot, I did have probably a lot more chats with Adam, our production manager, than I previously had. But often, and the great production managers, you sort of say to them, look, can we do this? And they turn around and go, yeah, but we'll work it out. Don't worry. And that does depend on money as well. So that's another thing. But often my relationships, sort of one of my strongest relationships, apart from with the director and the DOP, which is a really important on set one, would be with the producer, and getting a schedule together, then making sure all the cast are available to be able to shoot that schedule, and just liaising with them and making sure that they're on board with what we're shooting. Because I can say, look, I really think we can do this day, but you sort of need the producer to say, yeah, no, that's achievable. And on Ted Lasso, our producer on that is an ex-first AD that, you know, has been on Bond and done all sorts of things. So one of what he really liked to do, and it was actually really great because it meant that like I'd bring a schedule to him and be like, it's not working here, here, and here. And together we'd say, okay, well, what about this? And we'd sit there and just try and work the puzzle out for quite a lot of time towards the end when you sort of start getting penned in. But yeah.
You mentioned just there about standard day, continuous day, and obviously part of your responsibility, and presumably the second AD, is scheduling the days to work out how many hours each crew member is working. But there is also the possibility of overtime, and I was just wondering, there is the decision yours if you go that extra hour? And because obviously that has a financial cost, so I'm just curious about how that works on a set to decide.
Yeah, it's really funny because the roles sort of, so the producer is in charge of overtime and permitting that or not permitting it, along with the production manager, who might say, look, we've got in the budget 2 hours of overtime once a month or whatever. I think what happens is you kind of know, I'll be honest, as a first AD, and this is something I also learned from one of the other first ADs on Ted Lasso, called Jim Imber, who's been doing it for years and years and years. And we were having a chat after, I don't know, the second block, and he was like, you know, at 10 o'clock if you're going to run over, and you do. And once he said that, I kind of thought, yeah, you do actually. And actually what you sort of learn is how much foresight you need to give it. So, you know, if you've not turned over by 10 on certain shows, that you're really not, by the time you get to 6 o'clock, I mean, you're really not going to have all that day. So what are you able to do at that point in the day to help that? Do you switch around the scenes? You do less and get that, and you get something and you achieve it. But you can also then say to the producer at lunchtime or whenever, look, I don't think we're going to get the day. We either ask for overtime or we push this somewhere else. So, for example, going back to the comedy, like Ted Lasso, big budget versus small budget. On a small budget thing, you would get that day. So at 10 o'clock, I say, oh, I really think we're not going to get it. What would then happen is the whole crew in a small comedy would be like, right, we just got to get it. So the director might compromise on shots, the DOP might compromise on lighting. Everyone will just start compromising on what they're doing to make sure we get that day.
Sorry, Sophie, quickly. So is that your responsibility? So say at midday, would you bring all the crew together and say, listen, guys, we're not going to make the day, so you need to start thinking about how you're going to achieve this by 6 p.m.
I would say that not to the whole crew. I would say that to the director and the DOP. And I would say, what would you want to do? Do you want to carry on going as we are and try and work out a plan to put that scene or whatever elsewhere? Or do we want to just pick up the pace and think about the way they're shooting it? And that is not my decision whatsoever. I think the one thing you can forget, probably coming up even as an AD, but I think people forget, it's not my decision really to make any decisions. It's my job to present the possibilities, and then someone, director and DOP together, but essentially director and maybe producer, to then say, no, do you know what, we do need to get all this stuff here. And the producer often might come in, especially on comedies, and say, no, you guys need to get this done. And the director will say, okay, let's get this done. And then the director and the everyone will just do what they can, but I'm certainly not going to say you can't get, if the director says I need another shot on this, I'll just say yes, of course. I could always say to them at that point, getting another shot on this means we might not be able to get another shot later, or it might, put that in jeopardy. But depending with the director, often directors know this, they've experienced enough to know that it's all just a weighing up of the scales. And I think that's how you can really annoy someone as an AD, is to say, you have to do this, because it's not our job to say you should do anything. It's our job purely to say, if you do this, this is the repercussion. If we do this, this is what will happen. And sometimes it feels a little bit sort of out of your hands. So Mandy, we did Diane Morgan, who plays Mandy, is also the director in it. And often she would say, oh, I'm happy with that. We do a take or two. She really likes it quick. She likes to just go with the kind of naturalistic. She likes the sort of first shots in that way. And so it was quite quick and it goes that way. But then suddenly, and that was just a few people, few little heads in there. And because she's acting it and directing it, everything becomes a little bit simpler. Ted Lasso, you have probably about 3 or 4 writers on set, including Jason. You also have a director. The producer's not on set in Ted Lasso, which also happens more often in high-end drama. And so you've got a lot more people that might say, oh, actually, I need another take, or I need another one of this, or I need this. And I would never, ever go, oh, you can't actually, because that is like way above my pay grade. That moves into a whole other level. So,
but do you ever feel pressure as the first AD to complete the day, or is there, if after each day you're failing to complete, because is there criticism directed at the AD team and the schedule itself, as in?
Yeah, 100%. So naturally, I think it's sort of, I don't know if it's just changing generally in the industry, but as a rule, if you don't complete your day, it is the first AD's. The first AD has to answer it. Like, why did you not complete? So often what I'll do, especially when I start jobs, is I will write absolutely every single timing down on my piece of paper quietly without anyone knowing, because it's really anal and it would be very frustrating to watch. But it's more a sense of like seeing where the day's gone, and making sure that we're all kind of hitting our timings. And I think that's when you can push. But a great example is Ted Lasso, which is a job that you step on set just before 8 and you leave set 6:30. And I mean, I barely had a normal conversation with anyone until maybe towards the end of the shoot, because you are working so hard, just making sure you're equipping every little bit of time you possibly can, making sure that as soon as lighting is set up, we've got stand-ins in, checking that, just all these things. You're just trying to quip. And even then, something can happen in your day and it's completely out of your hands. A scene might get rewritten, or might be doing a scene and then something else is needed, or there's a change that happens. And that's kind of what's like lovely and more difficult, makes things more difficult, is when changes happen on set. It isn't what's like gone according to plan. And because of the nature of, I guess, Jason Sudeikis and maybe his sort of SNL days and all those things, everything's a lot more, right, let's throw this in and try this out, which is such a lovely thing to work with. But in the structure of television, it makes things slightly more chaotic and takes a bit more time. But that's different because almost it's sort of an American funded show. And I think in America, they do things a bit differently out there to how we do it in the UK. And I think that we're much more budget led in the UK than there.
Well, I think we're generally coming to an end of this, but I will just wrap up. I feel like an idiot now because I've completely forgot my last
no, don't worry. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, let's ask one last question. So anyone watching here at home and they're thinking, oh, this is really interesting, I really enjoyed listening to Sophie talk, you know, there's multiple different career routes. We run an ADFM course. That doesn't mean you have to go by that route at the NFTS, but there's also starting as a runner and working your way up, or as a floor runner. Is there any last advice you'd give anyone listening at home for someone who's interested in this career?
Yeah, about getting into it. I will say that the NFTS graduates we've had in the last year or two have been fantastic from the AD course. So I would say that I'm genuinely mean that, because I don't know what's changed in the last couple of years, but something has changed, and the people coming out from that course are really hands-on, willing to like get involved. But I would say, do what I did is I just Googled all of the shows that I really liked, and I found out the production company that made those shows, and I emailed them and just said, have you got any opportunities? I know there's lots of different websites and Facebook pages that I also managed to get work from, so I would definitely say that they're a good idea. And anyone that kind of works on it, if you see someone filming down the road, like, don't be afraid to just go up and just say, look, I'm really trying to get experience. Yeah, I know other friends who've done that. You know, they've been up in Yorkshire and suddenly like they're filming down the village, and they've asked and they've said, oh yeah, come and make cup teas, you know, and just do that way. I think with enough persistence, and persistence is key in everything in life, really, especially if you want to go in a competitive industry. Just be persistent and be open-minded, and don't be proud, and be hands-on, and always say, what can I do next? And don't, if you're standing still, then I'm sure there's something you can be doing. And making relationships is really important, but also like being hardworking and caring a bit about people and looking after people. And yeah, it's about making good relationships and sticking with them.
Sophie Worger, thank you so much for joining us today. It feels a bit like Desert Island Discs. I won't ask you what you want to take on the Desert Island with you. Is there a book you wish to take, or an item?
With me as to my AD island?
To your AD island.
Yes. Oh, probably my iPad, which has all my scripts and my schedule.
Make sure the island has Wi-Fi on it.
No, it doesn't need Wi-Fi, as long as I can download it all onto there.
That's fine. Okay, well, I will happily give you your iPad for your AD Desert Island.
Great, for the sort of 10 hours of battery life.
Yeah, exactly.